Good afternoon. My name is Kyle Thacker. I'm the Director of Government Procurement here at ACE Consulting, and wanted to take some time today to talk through the SF330, which is the Architect Engineer Qualification Sheet. If you're familiar with the federal government or just government projects in general, in any capacity, you've most likely ran across the requirement where you have to submit using the 330 format. Doing this for a number of years, both as a prime contractor as well as, a prime bidder, as well as assisting, our clients when they try and bid on these federal projects. There's often a lot of confusion, or just people don't really understand some of the ins and outs of the form, how it's used, why it's used, that type of thing. So today we just wanted to take a little bit of time and go through the form with you and kind of hopefully paint a little bit better picture to make you more aware, make you better suited to put your company's best foot forward whenever you're going after these procurement opportunities, specifically in the architect engineer space. So I have pulled up here, I'm obviously sharing my screen today. This, if you're interested, just going back, I'm pulling this off of the GSA's website. The form itself, you can do, a simple Google search for SF330 will take you to this page. I'm using the very first link on gsa.gov. You click on that link and that'll take you to a downloadable file, which is the PDF that most people are used to seeing. So that's how we got here. And if you look at some of this information, a lot of this is standard. It was put in place for a very specific reason. The main one of which is the Brooks Act, which if you know anything about federal procurement, there was a piece of legislation called the Brooks Architect Engineer Act of 1972 that was basically codified within federal language, and it required federal agencies to select architect and engineer firms based on qualifications, not price. So this form in and of itself is a way to sort of standardize how applicants go through the process of submitting their company qualifications in a way that helps the government reviewer spell out, okay, this is clearly the best value, not just the lowest price. And you can see here, whenever they did that, they took a lot of time in spelling out the purpose of the form, the general instructions, and a lot of this stuff you've probably read, and it probably makes somewhat sense to you, but there's still more to this than what you might think. So we'll get started on here when we go through these first couple pages. What is this, page 4 of instructions? You'll note that we have some different functional codes. These will come into play here later, which we'll talk about those. Same thing here, list of experience categories. Same thing, this will take place in the later part of the form. Put a pin in those for now. So now we're down to this part, what they call part 1, which is the contract specific qualifications. So whenever you or your company is filling out and trying to propose a solution to a federal buyer in terms of a design or some kind of professional service along those lines, it's the form itself is going to break down your company's proposal into two parts, part 1, part 2. Part 1 simply covers the information that is specific to the solicitations, to the requirements that you're wanting to go through here. Most of this stuff here is pretty easy for you, obviously, and I'll zoom in a little bit just to kind of go through some of this. Title, location, who's the point of contact. Really, the big thing here, this is more strategic for you. There's a strategy in listing your proposed team. A lot of times we work with clients who they might not have the engineering side, they might just have the architectural side, or vice versa. They might have the engineer and not the architect, or they might have a landscape architect but they don't have a mechanical engineer, whatever. This area, part C here, is your ability to demonstrate to the government the team that you're proposing, right? So what you want to do is basically highlight to them several different things. Number one, who they are, where they're located, what role that they're going to actually be serving on this contract, if that's mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, civil engineer, what have you. You want to fill all of these out. If it's just your company, then it's just going to be your name right here. Very simple. You can mark as to whether or not you're simply being the prime, if you're a JV, or if you're a subcontractor. This is very important. And one of the things that people often don't pay enough attention to, in my opinion, is the location of the office. We've ran into several instances of solicitations that require you to have an office within a certain geographic range to the project site. So if it's a VA medical center in California, they want to know, where is your firm located? You're not going to be scored as high if your architectural firm is located in Connecticut, right? There's going to be a delay there. You're not right next door. So pay attention to that and sort of talk through that with your team, how you're going to outline and address the needs of this project to the government. You might be filling a certain portion of the contract, but you might need to run it out of your partner's office in the next city over. So just kind of pay attention to that. And this right here also goes often missed. So in addition to spelling out your proposed team's information, it's going to be very critical for you to highlight your organizational chart of your proposed team. You can check this box whether or not it's attached in a separate form, or a lot of times what clients will do is they will print this out to its own separate document, and then they'll do the Adobe PDF page editor to where they'll splice in the pages and just kind of make it work there. But do not forget to show I've done my part in showing you not just the proposed team, but I'm showing you how that proposed team is going to interact with one another if awarded the contract. So moving on here to that's parts A through D, just on the first page. The next page here is part E. Part E is you're reading off a template right now that the government provides you. The one thing that I'll say is whenever you're doing this, make as many copies of this form as you need. It says right there, complete one section E for each key person. I cannot tell you how many times we've assisted clients and they'll only fill out one of these, and they'll say, well, there's only one part E in the template. I just filled out the one. That's not compliant, basically. You need to go through. You need to spell out the names of each key personnel that you have on this contract. If you're going to your proposed team and there's your civil engineer, your architect, your mechanical, electrical, all these different individuals, you're going to need one of those Section E resumes for each person. This is obviously it's a resume style format. So a lot of times, your engineer, your architect, they'll have this information readily available. If they do not, we'll get to this here in just a minute, but what you need to do is pay extra attention to each one of these blocks. And people say, well, do you need to fill out A through E? Absolutely. If they have enough project experience, if all of these blocks are full all the way down to the end of the first page, but they're looking for specific information. They want to know briefly, what did you do? What was the size? What was the cost, etc., for the specific role that you filled? The other thing here, you need to be able to delineate the professional services. So, okay, it was a design, let's just say that took place from 2020 through 2021, and then construction began in 2022, right? You're really trying to paint out the entire picture for this contracting agent to be able to say, okay, they know from cradle to grave, here's everything that this architect or engineer did specifically on this project, and this is why it's the most relevant to us. So pay very specific attention. If you're filling out an SF330 for VA hospitals, you're gonna need to list different projects than if you were filling out an SF330 for a Corps of Engineers project building a levee or a dam or something like that. So don't just put these things at face value. Take your time and build out these relevant projects in such a way that it really speaks to the needs of what you're doing. And again, copy and paste this page and make one for every single point of contact that you're going to park on this project if awarded. I can't stress that enough. Moving on to part F here, which is example projects. So these are we list these internally as our, we call them our project sheets. These are your a really good example of what most general contractors would consider their PPQs, or their past performance qualifications sheets. And it's basically one sheet equals one past performance example. So in the same way that we made duplicate copies of section E, we're going to make duplicate copies of section F. A lot of times your solicitation will call out the number of how many of these you can actually list in here. It says you can present as many as requested by the agency, or 10 if not specified. So 10's, if I'm honest, 10 seems a little excessive. Just in my opinion. Typically it's 3 to 5 projects is what you'll see most of the time. But again, make note that you're trying to really spell out the best examples where you as an organization have worked together. Now, for these blank spaces in block 24 here, obviously you can, I hopefully don't have to go through all these blocks with you, 20 through 23C. But when you get to block 24, this is where you can do sort of a narrative write-up. You can insert your description. You can insert. I've seen a lot of people insert photographs. Say for example, it's a I don't know, a VA MRI machine. What did the MRI machine look like? What did you do? This is really kind of your chance to get more bang for your buck in terms of selling that past performance, just because it's a real blank slate. If you can fit it within inside this box here for this form, that's going to be perfect. And I would recommend, in the same way that you've taken the time to fill out these resumes up here, take the time to build out a catalog of these section F sheets. Do one, just the instance that you've completed a project or began working on a project. Go ahead and fill one of these things out preemptively for your organization, because I can't tell you enough how valuable that information is going to be to go ahead and have that archived catalog available at your fingertips the next time you run across a bid. Well, when was the last time we did an MRI installation? Boom, right here. You already have started to work through building out that archive of quick reference data. Really take the time to do that. And then down at the bottom, you'll notice that it gives you a section for the firms that were involved in this project. This should correlate, hopefully it will. I'm not saying it's mandatory, but it should correlate with your proposed team up here. Anytime from a contract specialist, anytime that from their point of view and they're looking at your SF330, they want to see connections between not only the company and the team members, but on the specific projects. If you can tie those three things together and show, partner A, partner B, partner C with X, Y, and Z personnel all listed together, and that's also going to correlate here to part G. But they want to see how many of these projects are actually listed together. Because again, this helps you as the bidder really sell your team, really sell this proposed solution to the buyer in such a way that it might not always be clear. I just note that for every one of these, I would hope that you would be able to list additional firm names, and then even further, those names and key personnel should then further correlate into this part G, which is simply a check reference section. So as you go through and fill out this block, I've got an engineer. This is whatever, Ted. I'm going to butcher this. This is Ted. Ted is our civil. And then we have Kim as our electrical engineer. Okay, so for these, say you fill out your entire team. Note that they give you 10 slots in the same way that they gave you up to 10 projects up here. Project sheet number 5, let's just say, was a project that Ted and Kim both worked on. And so what we're going to do is we're going to check that box. And now the government knows that on project sheet number 5, I've given you a resume for Ted, I've given you a resume for Kim, and now those two, that's going to really enhance our review, in that the government already knows that Ted and Kim have worked together before previously. That's going to be huge for you. Anytime that you can list as many of those connections as possible, do it. Make sure that that's as easy to understand as it can be for them. Same kind of thing here. Note that down at the bottom of this section 9, example projects key, you can just kind of make a quick list of these projects. It says from section F, right? You can go ahead and make these project names whatever it is that you want. MRI project. Again, butchering that, but you get the idea. It's just it's a very categorical way for the government to go through and quickly see who worked with who in what capacity. Right? Moving on to section H is the additional information. This is, again, going to be probably more specific to each individual solicitation. So they might ask you to provide, specific agency information. They might ask you to provide things like let's just say a certain clearance or a certain certificate or license or whatever the case may be. You can, I've seen people do this sheet a couple different ways. You can either fill out notice when I clicked on it, it took away that box, but you can either fill this out, or you can just say, include it on another page, whatever, see next page, and then go in there and then splice together your license numbers or your certificates or whatever information is needed, and make sure that you sign and date this with the name of the individual who's obviously authorized to sign. In my case, it would be me because I'm the one putting this together, but whoever on your team needs to sign it, make sure that they get that signed. And that actually, once you've got to this point in the overall submission, you're able to move towards part 2 of the SF330. Part 2 is, as it implies, is going to be more of the general qualifications for your firm specifically. So going back to, not to make you to jump around too much here, but going back to this proposed team, for every individual that's listed on this proposed team, you're going to want to provide a part 2 for their company. Right? So if you have 5 partners, then you're going to have 5 part 2s to go through, and it's going to spell out, here's the firm name, where they're located, what year you were established, what your UEI is, and this sheet here, starting in block 9, this part of the sheet here, is where we're going to start to reference some of this key information back up in the top. So this in bottom of page 4. So starting on page 5, you'll see the list of disciplines. So you'll have codes and descriptions, and then starting on page 6, you'll have the list of experience categories, code and description. So what I often tell people to do is go ahead and print this out or have this available. That way you're not scrolling up and down, trying to remember, okay, well, an electrical engineer was a code 21. Just go ahead and print this information off for yourself as you're filling this out, and come down here to the bottom of the part 2, and this is where you're going to start to fill this information in. So employees by discipline, architectural engineer, civil engineer, take your pick. That's sort of the first level codes. And then for your company, you're going to say, how many do you employ? Do you have 5 civil? Are they all at the same are they all branch locations? Again, this is painting that picture for the reviewer. How locally are you centered on the site? They want to know that. How quickly can you be there oftentimes? And then for your experience, this is where they give you a revenue index down here at the bottom. I didn't realize that highlight all that. They give you this revenue index, and this just kind of gives the government a little bit further gauge on how big of the projects you've worked on. You want to be able to list any kind of projects at this point. Obviously, the more that you can list that closely relate to the solicitation, the better. But, if this is kind of, again, company information, if you've done more natural gas or more fallout shelters, barracks, if you've done more commercial buildings, low-rise facility, community facilities, whatever, just take the time to spell all this out and don't feel as obligated to put everything that only relates to the solicitation. They want to see everything at this point that you've done. You want to see a wide range of capability is the goal here. So after this, after you fill out block 9, block 10 with all the codes and the names, you can go through into block 11 and kind of give us an overall revenue index there based on these amounts. And that's pretty much the long and the short of it after you've done that. And that paints together, again, a very good picture for the government reviewer to be able to see how capable and to what level of diversity you have to fill the needs that they're asking for. So one final thing that I'll say here, just in terms of filling out this form, this is, again, like most things, it's a living, breathing document. You don't want to just build one of these out and then forget about it. Part 1, anything that you list in Part 1 is typically going to need to be updated or archived just because the solicitation requirements are going to change. But I would strongly encourage you to also keep that same mentality with this Part 2. Update it certainly. If you're a small business, once a year. If you're a large business, you might need to update this document once every quarter or every 2 quarters, because you've got a high volume of experience that you could list here that really might set you apart from other firms. So just make sure that as you take the time to do this, treat it like a reoccurring item. Make sure that this information is current. Make sure that you're putting forth the best use case that you can to the government to say, hey, my company and I are very well suited to meet these needs in such a way that nobody else can. So I've seen several companies will print this out and sort of make it in a little bit easier form to edit. You'll notice that as I've kind of went through here, it's populated these text boxes for me to type in. I would strongly encourage you to probably not do that. I would insert this file into an editor before I did this. Right now I'm just going off of the GSA's website, and it can get a little tricky sometimes whenever you try and start to edit fonts and things like that. So just a word to the wise, make sure that you don't fall into that trap that I've that I fell into early on, which is trying to do too much through a web browser. And in summary, there's a lot to these. This is again a very complicated document, and it's something that a lot of people oftentimes will get conflicting information, or they kind of get overwhelmed. I hope that this has been helpful to you and your teams, and obviously if you have questions or need support in any way, we'd love to chat with you about it and help out any way that we can. Thanks again for your time, and hope this has been helpful.